The alley was dark and cold, lined by walls of stone that were once wood. The sound of a water droplet splashing against the stone ground made Elenshia jump back as she slunk down the dank corridor. It was almost dark, and the long shadows across the city cast everything in an eerie green glow. She knew she had felt something. The first something she had felt since she lost her soul. She had felt it, hadn't she? Maybe it was just her mind playing tricks on her. She had heard of those whose souls were burned out, going mad. Separate from the normal madness, which of course they were not subject to. People who couldn't cope with losing themselves. She of course felt that too. That pull towards the darkness. The desire to lay down and let the world pass her by. That would be preferable to this, wouldn't it? This void. A small rodent skittered by, brushing her leg and squealing as if it had not noticed her previously. Her heart skipped a beat at being surprised by the little creature. It was the little things magic affected that she missed most of all. Things she took for granted, such as sensing the souls of living creatures, or seeing farther, breathing deeper, and hearing better. She missed it more than she could ever explain or even comprehend. It was like losing an arm or leg. But in truth, it was even worse than that. She leaned back against the cold and damp wall of wooden slats and boards, long neglected, and slid to the ground below. A low, guttural sob escaped her throat before she could force it back down. This wouldn't be a bad place to die, she figured. Quiet. Dark. It would be days, if not weeks, before someone found her. No one would miss her, or even know who she was. She would be cast aside, like the other refuse of the city. Perhaps she would even be burned in a traditional Elken funeral, but she doubted it. Skittering announced the return of the small rodent that evidently called this alley home. It watched her warily, not sure what she was or why it couldn't sense her. All living beings with souls, from the greatest to the least, could use magic to some degree, no matter how small. It enhances senses and grants intuition. To anyone who actually focused on her, she would be an anomaly. The dull side of a knife slid gently across her throat. She wanted to jump, to scream, but she knew better. It was too late for any type of resistance. She had no soul to sense the assailant behind her, nor magic to attack them. She was at their mercy.
Who are you?
A cool voice asked.
I am Elenshia.
A cold silence hung in the air.
Just Elenshia? No titles, no stations.
Part of her wanted to list her accolades and previously held positions, but she doubted it would do any good here. The knife fell away and the leather-gloved hand that held it disappeared between the rotting wooden planks behind her. A figure materialized from the shadows to her left, black cloak billowing in the stale wind. He was shorter than her, a human, presumably. Very few humans would come to a place like this.
You're following me.
That's a statement. Do you want me to deny it?
Why? Why are you following me?
I thought I felt something.
Sorry, lady. I'm not interested.
He turned to vanish into the shadows.
No, wait!
She said. He paused, back still towards her.
I'm soulless, and I thought I felt something.
He turned towards her slowly, his shadowed face looking ominous in the eerie glow from the canopy above. But she almost thought she could see a thin smile.
Well then, if you're going to follow me, don't get lost this time.
His statement caught her off guard. He reached out his gloved hand, which she cautiously took. Then she stood. Without warning, he turned and dashed back into the shadows. A surge of adrenaline and confusion rose within her, and against her better judgment, she took off after him in quick pursuit. What game this person was playing at, she did not know, but she could use a good chase. Elenshia followed the strange robed man through Greatwood's dark underbelly, struggling to keep up. He darted through buildings and alleyways and down into the city's sprawling underground routeways. During Brokken's siege of the place, the Elken inhabitants had grown their city downward among the roots as well as up into the branches. The subterranean levels were more easily defensible and proved themselves excellent for bunkers and food storage during the long siege. In the centuries since, however, they had been all but abandoned. The roots wove together to create large tunnels spiraling down into the depths of Apis. The tunnels would branch off in dozens of directions, making it easy for someone to get lost down there. She would have gotten lost several times if it wasn't for the faint, numb feeling in her chest, pointing her in the direction of her quarry. She went deeper and deeper, only catching rare glimpses of the strange man she followed. The tunnels would be pitch black at this depth if it wasn't for the otherworldly glow of living energy that snaked through the roots like veins. The tunnels grew thinner the deeper she went, and a growing sense of dread welled up inside her as the walls closed in. She had heard stories of terrible Beshen roaming through the routeways, dragging curious children and unwary adventurers to their dark demises. She didn't know if she believed those stories, but this far down, it was hard not to wonder. After what felt like an hour, the narrow, twisting corridor of tangled roots opened up into a large chamber. The roots of the tunnel melded into the round stone walls. The circular chamber was probably 100 feet across, as she could see the thin, glowing vein of light from a tunnel on the other side. She heard the thunderous sound of rushing water from somewhere ahead. She moved several feet into the dark chamber and went to take another step when a voice cut through above the roar of the water.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
The voice of the man she had followed said from somewhere to her right. She stopped where she stood. The room began to lighten as she stood there, though lighten may not be the correct word to describe it. It was more that the darkness of the room pooled to one side, allowing everything else to become not exactly visible, but perceivable. The not light revealed a steep drop into depths below her. This room appeared to be a cistern of sorts, and she was standing precariously on the edge of a narrow, railless walkway. To her right, where the darkness had seemed to pull towards, stood the mysterious man, covered in shadows and darkness. But she could still feel him there. As she followed him, she had grown more comfortable with that feeling. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before. In the past, when she sensed someone's soul, it was because she could feel the power, the movement, the energy. Like the sense you feel on your skin during a thunderstorm, or the pull towards the wind on a beach, or a cliff despite it blowing the other way. This feeling was distinctly different. It was more like dull hunger or thirst, an abscess in the universe that its energies were trying to fill, like putting your ear to a pile of thick wool that seemed to pull in sound and muffle it. Or perhaps like submerging oneself in water while its pressure tried to force its way in. In this case, her soul, or lack thereof, was the pressure being drawn in trying to force equilibrium. It was a consuming void, a numb pain, and it fascinated her.
What are you?
She shouted over the roar beneath them. She could not see his face, but somehow she could tell he was smiling.
I am Karna.
That wasn't my question.
I know, but that's all the answer you can get for now.
Elenshia blinked, and the darkness once again filled the room. A few heartbeats later, a small flame sprang to life where the man stood. It was colorless and didn't cast any illumination on the world around it, but it stood in stark contrast to the pitch blackness.
Follow me,
he said again, and the small flame disappeared into another opening in the wall, one not illuminated by the living roots. She followed the flame down the dark corridor. Her footsteps echoed off the stone floor and walls. She heard the sound of a rusted old door swinging open ahead and then close behind her several moments later as she walked. The flame split into 3, then 9, then shot outwards like stars, each flame settling 10 feet from the center. The flames began to burn brighter and faster and change color, illuminating the world around them. She shielded her eyes against the harsh light, allowing them to adjust slowly. When she looked up again, she realized those flames, which now burned a natural yellow, sat in torch sconces, shedding light on a domed room. It was scarcely furnished, but clearly an actively used living area. Bookshelves covered 2/3 of the circular chamber, full of scrolls and tomes. A desk with papers strewn across it sat in a small gap between 2 of the bookcases. On the other side of the room was a large fireplace and stove, seemingly cut into the stone wall itself. Various pots and pans and other cooking utensils lay atop a wooden table near it. A bed lay near the center of the room, though it looked to be rarely used, as evidenced by the piles upon piles of paper, books, scrolls, and strange artifacts that Elenshia didn't recognize. The stone floor was covered by a number of ornate Elken rugs, but in the gaps between them, she could see numerous runes that she couldn't identify, etched into the stone itself. Gornath removed his hood and hung his cloak on a hook near the door where they had entered. He had a young and intense face, with small tattoos or scars, making various subtle shapes and patterns on his skin. The same markings wrapped around his neck, arms, and hands. Under his cloak, he wore an intricately sewn black shirt and coat that clung tightly to his form, with a strange black skull of no creature she had ever seen, acting as a clasp at the center of his chest. The skull was spiked and ridged with far too many sockets for eyes. It was unnatural. He bore a ring on the central finger of each hand that had a chain of dark gemstones, bones, and other strange objects dangling from it beneath.
What are you?
She asked again.
Human, last I checked. Sorry for the chase. I had to make sure you could, actually sense me.
How can I sense you? My soul?
Turns out, you don't need one.
The strange man said, sitting down on a lush cushioned chair.
It is the source of all power!
It is, but that doesn't mean it's the only source. After the schism, mortal kind were left soulless like you. Yet we've also heard of the things they were able to accomplish even before the convergence. Despite what your Woden gods would have you believe, they're not the be-all end-all. Power existed before them, and after they left our world in rubble.
The Woden are not my gods,
she said softly and mournfully.
All the same, magic exists independently from any god, if you know where to look.
And where is that?
He smiled and narrowed his eyes towards her.
I don't know you well enough yet to give you all of my secrets.
She knew that different cultures had different beliefs concerning how magic worked, but it was always dependent on one's soul. She had never heard of soulless using magic of any kind, other than the legends of the Dark Age before the Convergence, but everyone knew those were mere fantasy. Magical energy came from the otherworld through the soul. That was all there was to it. But what if he was right? What if there was another way? A way for Elenshia to use magic again, to feel the world again. His words bordered heresy based on all she had ever known of magic. But if it was possible...
To answer your earlier question, you can sense me because I don't have a soul either. My void calls to yours. 2 whirlpools pulling towards each other in the same way that those with souls can sense each other. So too can those without souls. No, we are more rare.
If what he told her was true, she had seen him use magic before, unlike any she had ever seen, but it was undeniably magic. Her heartbeat quickened, a glimmer of hope dancing to life within her, a small candle flame that could be put out with a breath, but which could also set a forest aflame.
Now, tell me, how did you lose your soul?
He asked, motioning for her to sit on another chair. She hesitantly obliged.
I would rather not speak of it.
I can't help you unless I know.
She sighed deeply, not wanting to relive the horror and shame of her defeat, but reluctantly, she gave in. She told him of the gala, of her position as a warden, and of the ensuing bloodbath with the Hemomancer that left her without her power. It hurt to recall the memories, but the hope this man offered her was worth it.
All that, and yet you survived?
He leaned towards her.
Impressive.
And you?
She asked, still wary of the mysterious man. He smiled again, leaning back into his chair.
This isn't about me.
He stood and walked to stand before her. His smile faded to sincerity, and he reached his hand out to her.
But I will show you how to live again, Elenshia, if you let me.
She hesitated. Then the small candle flame of hope set the forest ablaze, and she placed her hand in his. The storm had been raging over Greatwood for days, with no signs of letting up, as if the gods themselves were determined to leave Elenshia trapped here for eternity. She had returned to the surface several times, gathering supplies, asking about the Hengegate, and discovering what she could about the current political landscape of the complex city-state. But no matter how many times she surfaced, something kept pulling her back down, into the depths. Cornath's promises of power, promises that she could live again, were too much to ignore. He had a way about him that drew her in. Since the bloodbath, this was the first time she had felt alive. The chance to feel her soul again filled her with a hope she hadn't known was possible. She walked through the underbelly of the rooted city, passing the cistern in near complete darkness. She had grown used to the darkness, guided by the phantom tug on her burned-out soul, by the mysterious man that dwelled here. He spoke to her about power and control like she had never heard of before. A power outside the strict tenets of gods and monsters, a power of one's own, ungoverned by the whims of apathetic beings. It called to her more than she could ever admit to herself. There was a darkness, too. A stirring just beneath the surface of the power he talked about with such reverence. A deepness that she wanted to ignore. She wanted to believe that she could live again, that she could feel the world as it was meant to be. But everything came at a cost. Even Brokken's order, and the power he had granted her. To pretend this power was different was naivety. She ran her hand along the cold stone until her finger met wood. She knocked twice, then pushed the door open into Cornath's quaint living area. The area was already lit by torches held in wall sconces around the circular room. The room was noticeably empty of Cornath himself, however. She nearly called out to him, but stopped herself. She couldn't feel his soul, or lack thereof. She had met him down here every day since she had been in Greatwood, where he spoke to her of the power he possessed, without explaining to her how to accomplish such feats. He was baiting her, as sure as a Kelgul lures its prey to a watery grave. But why? What was he hiding from her? She felt as though ever since she had come to Greatwood, she had been in a trance, led along by breadcrumbs of magic from this strange man. This wasn't like her. She was confident and strong. She led others by the force of her will and the strength of her heart. She was no longer a young girl who chased dreams out into the waves, only to get dashed across the rocks. That girl died on the shoals of Pyrrhica. She was a woman who was stronger now, wiser now, a woman who had her strength tested and tempered by fire and trial, a woman who was also dead now. The brief moment of strength and defiance that had welled up within her died on her mind, and the void of what used to be her soul descended back into the fog of hunger. Hunger for power, for control, for the life she once had, knowing that she'll never have it again. Her eyes fell to the floor with her will, where she noticed something that she had spotted her first time down here. Strange etchings and markings carved into the stone floor, but which was covered in a patchwork of rugs and carpets. The markings matched the ones on Cornath's skin, but other than that, they bore resemblance to nothing Elenshia had ever seen before. The woman she had been may be dead, like the foolish girl she once was, but that didn't mean she couldn't learn from her. She never would have been led by the nose to a place like this. She also would have sought answers, no matter the cost. She knelt down towards the edge of one of the patchwork rugs, and after a moment's hesitation, grabbed the corner and peeled it off the floor in a fluid motion, flinging it across the room. It uncovered part of what she could only identify as a ritual circle of some kind. She moved several more rugs, revealing more of the circle, going as far as to shift the book-laden bed and writing desk to unveil the entire set of markings. Though she couldn't read the symbols themselves, the shape and size of the circle marked it as a summoning ring. Such rings were historically used to summon and bind Faeden, much like how the Ministry's keepers were created. Though Elken would also use similar circles to commune with the Woden and to summon servants of those gods. Curses surfaced in her mind even thinking of the gods that her people had abandoned. Generally, such rituals could only be performed by larger groups of people. What was Cornath doing with such a circle? Without thinking, Elenshia tried to reach out with soulsight to see if she could determine the nature of the strange rituals. An empty feeling rose up within her, realizing what she had tried to do and remembering that she would never be able to. But wait, she did feel something. See something. Despite no longer having the ability to even use soulsight, she saw. The alien runes and markings seemed to call out to her. Though she couldn't read them, she felt like she could understand them. She saw images of death and destruction, wars and genocides across time. She caught glimpses of a white land with a black sky, ash and dust and bone, skeletal colossi marching across the grim landscape. She saw the worlds torn asunder until nothing was left but infinite void. She gasped for breath and fell to her knees, reaching out her hand trying to block the visions that bombarded her. The runes, they still called to her. No, calling makes it seem as if there was a choice, as if she could ignore the call. This was a demand to be recognized, understood, and obeyed. She crawled against her will towards the center of the circle that she had uncovered. But it wasn't really against her will, was it? Part of her wanted this, or at least the power that it promised. But no, this wasn't what she wanted. Her will was stronger than whatever darkness was trying to force its way in. She was Elken. She was a paladin. She was a warden. And she would be damned to the veil before she let something else control her. She screamed and fought back against the onslaught of thoughts and visions. She pulled with every ounce of will she had. There was a void where her soul once abided, and whatever this was trying to force its way into the vacancy. But she would not let it. She tried to fill her mind with other things, other images of Pyrrhica, of home, images of the sacred paladinic order marching in perfect parade, of her own suit of armor, then her warden's gorget, images of blood, of sending eidolons to attack village after village of the blood brood in Brokken's name, of a young man standing over her battered body, blood flowing like a whirlpool around him, eyes full of hatred. Her will faltered thinking of the Hemomancer. Her breath grew ragged. that creature's face burning itself into her mind. Blood, death, the void. She quickly forced herself to concentrate on anything else, closing off her mind to the horrors of her past and the darkness before her. Its oppressive will continued to batter against her mind and empty soul like Brokken's rams against the walls of Greatwood so long ago. But like those walls, she would not give in. She thought of Brokken, his holy war of unification, a war that brought about the first age of peace that the mortal world had known since the Woden oppression. She thought of his iron fist and indomitable will. She thought of another suit of armor, shining with a dull metallic glow, cleaving its way through otherworldly beasts. She thought of its determination, its unwavering focus, its... She snapped back, throwing herself from the strange runic circle. She was sweating and panting. She felt the unknowable knowledge that had tried to force itself inside her recoil and fade as she regained control of her own mind and will. The impossible meaning of the runes slipped from her mind. What had happened? What were the images of that eidolon that she had seen at the end there? She had never seen a construct quite like that one before, but it felt so real. She hastily stood up, throwing the rugs over the runes once more, and turned to flee out of the room, where she heard footsteps on the other side of the doorway. Great. This was just her luck. Cornath opened the creaky wooden door with one hand, while staring down into the small book held in the other. After a moment of standing in the doorway, he tore his eyes away from the tome and met Elenshia's gaze with concern. She must have looked an awful sight. Her chest still rose and fell uncontrollably, and she felt as if she was sweating from every pore.
Elenshia, are you all right?
He asked, with what appeared to be honest concern. Then his eyes fell to the hastily piled rugs behind her. His eyes took on a dangerous cast, as he evidently put things together in his own mind. A weight of anxiety settled over her shoulders. She needed to get out of this cave, out of this city, off this sphere if at all possible. She had only seen a fraction of what this man could do, but despite standing nearly a head taller than him, he frightened her. He had only known her as a weak and hopeless woman seeking meaning. Perhaps she could still be that woman.
I saw things. The markings on the floor. They spoke to me.
Sniveling was not very becoming of her, but she would do what she needed to get out of this place alive. Her pride would do nothing for her here. Cornath's gaze curiously softened.
What did you see?
Death. So much death. And another place. With white mountains and pale giants. There was so much... I don't know.
His eyes flicked around the room, like someone desperately trying to solve a riddle. Then they locked back onto her own eyes, and he tilted his head slightly to the right.
You resisted these visions?
He asked. She nodded emphatically.
I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't understand. I fell back on my training as a paladin and pushed it away.
That was a very foolish thing to do. You weren't ready,
he said in anger, though whether towards her or himself, she could not tell. He pushed past her and pulled the rugs off of the runes. She flinched, half expecting them to call to her again, but they didn't.
Those markings. What do they mean? I almost thought I could understand them for a moment,
she said, slowly inching her way towards the fireplace on the left side of the room, where various pots, pans, and other cooking implements lay. Her eyes flicked quickly to the fire poker, but no. Though the only thing that resembled a weapon, she would need to be extraordinarily precise with a tool such as that. Her eyes then fell to a wide frying pan. and she deftly knelt down and lifted the pan behind her back while he was still inspecting the runes. She inched back towards him, the pan held tight behind her back. She moved as quietly as she could, though she feared her thundering heart would give her away.
You weren't ready. But even still, no one has ever.
He froze. If she was going to move, she had to do it now, but she felt rooted in place. Fear like tar spread across her entire body. What was happening to her? Her body shook like it did the first time she rode into battle under Brokken's banner. Cornath stood motionless for ages. Then he spoke.
I expected more from you.
His voice was cold, and the words stung like frost.
I don't know what you mean.
Her voice quivered. He turned around to face her, a look similar to betrayal in his eyes, as if he wasn't the one who all but lured her down here, trying to perform some dark ritual on her.
You'll find that rather ineffective,
he said, glancing down as if through her to the pan she held. She slowly brought the pan around, then let it slip from her fingers. It clanged against the stone floor.
I suppose I owe you some answers, don't I?
Cornath said, disappointed.
That would be nice,
she replied. Her heart still pounded ravenously in her chest. Cornath sighed.
There is a way of inverting one's soul, or lack thereof, allowing it to draw power from a place other than the other world. It grants incredible and terrible power. I thought you could benefit from such power. I had wished to teach you more of the power before exposing you to it like this.
He turned his back to her.
So you sought to brainwash me before trying to corrupt me with some dark ritual? Something has felt off since I met you, but I ignored it. You were using magic to compel me, weren't you? How much of these past days has actually been me?
She nearly shouted at him.
Enough. Yes, I can compel you, but I can't control you. You wanted power, and I had a solution. I still have a solution, Elenshia.
I've seen your solution in that vision. This power you speak of, it craves destruction. Wholesale obliteration of all that is. Can you really claim that the death and destruction it craves is worth a little power?
It's not about the power for me,
he shouted, spinning on his heel.
I've been given the chance to do something meaningful, something right.
Right? By whose definition?
Cornath stared at her for a moment.
Whose would you accept? Does anyone get to define right from wrong? Good from evil?
Brokken.
Brokken is a god of order. Do you think he gives a damn about what is right? Do you think the genocides he committed were right? The millions he killed to enforce his will upon the spheres? Right and wrong are such arbitrary things. If a man murders a village in cold blood, that's wrong. But what if that entire village were members of the Blood Brood? It would be justified then, wouldn't it?
She felt a pang of guilt at that comment. But it was different, of course. The Brood served Crom, and Crom was a god of blood. That meant he was evil, didn't it? And anyone who followed him would be complicit in that evil. Cornath sighed.
Evil is subject to which side of the river you're standing on, Elenshia. I just choose to go with the flow of the river itself. It was there before the land was. It will be there when the land is gone.
He paused. He pinched the bridge of his nose and shook his head slightly.
Leave if you want. I won't stop you. You're useless to me now.
He turned his back to her again and pulled the corner of one of the rugs to cover the runes etched into the floor. Useless. The word hit her like an arrow. She left her people because she believed their endless lamentations were useless without action. Then she dedicated her life to pursuing action, to do what she believed was the right thing. But was it ever? Did it matter? Now she was useless to Brokken. Useless to his empire and the paladins. Useless to this man and whatever dark god he served. She stumbled out of the small round room and into the darkness of the underground cistern. She hugged the left wall and moved along towards the exit tunnel, its veins of dull light leading up into the void. She had failed Brokken. She had failed her people and everything she had ever believed in. Perhaps she truly was useless. She looked back towards the faint light escaping from Cornath's room. She had seen something in those visions. The suit of armor, like an eidolon, but it looked like Brokken's armor, not a paladin's. What did it mean? She could still feel the sense of pure determination radiating from the being. It was overwhelming, a will almost as strong as the one that tried to force itself upon her. It had to be connected to her lord in some way. If only she could see the vision again, she could. Standing in the darkness of the long-abandoned root tunnels of Greatwood, Elenshia had a terrible idea.